Joel Embiid will win the MVP award for the regular season. And with the way that we are defining the MVP award, I don't think that there's really anybody who is close to doing the things that he's doing. Right now, he's averaging around 35 points, 12 rebounds, and 6 assists. And we need to really take a moment to respect the greatness that it takes for a player to even do that. But it's even more effective when you have a player who's a center that is doing that. For a very, very long time, we didn't really have, centers who were that dominant enough to shake the game up until we had Shaq. And then, of course, we had, players before him like the Admiral. But I feel like ever since Shaq really came along, we had the expectations that, Anthony Davis is going to be the next one coming up. But he's kind of like faltered on the wayside in terms of our, expectations and aspirations for him. But for a person who has been pretty much on a rebuild mode until like the last couple of seasons, Joel Embiid has been one of the best centers in the league. And with the way that offenses has to kind of like run through him, very similar to how a Houston Harden's offense have to run through him, not in the sense that they do the same exact thing, but in the sense that the game doesn't really move without them. Joel Embiid, however, with the advancements of Nick Nurse as his coach, has been able to do a lot more things off ball, but the same principles still apply to when he has the ball. Because the reality is that once he unlocked his outside scoring, there's really not much you can do to a player like that. His size gives him enough power that he can get into the paint and do whatever he wants in the paint, which is something that, is required of all big men. But for a lot of NBA history, we haven't really had big men that were able to kind of like do both. Right now, the only comparable person to Joel Embiid is Jokic. And in my opinion, Jokic has more of a winning impact on the game. But with the way that the MVP award is aligned and how it's pretty much revolving only around like scoring, nobody really cares about rebounds. Nobody really cares about assists as much unless you're like averaging almost a double-digit assists. If you were to look at the game through that lens and saying, okay, scoring is the most important facet, with also, getting your teammates involved a little bit, there's really nobody near Joel Embiid. And even the more comparable person of Jokic is not averaging 35 points. Now, we'll say outside of the centers of Jokic and Embiid, there is one person that is playing pretty well and honestly MVP caliber in my opinion, and that is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Now, will he win it? I don't really know. I think if Joel Embiid misses more games and then disqualifies himself out of the MVP category, I think that Shai is probably the next person in line outside of Jokic to actually win the MVP. Now, when you actually look at the game, this is the most space that Joel Embiid has ever gotten to play with, even when he had Harden on the team. The issue when Harden was on the team is that they didn't really have consistent shooters, and not in the sense that they didn't have really good shooters. It's just that when it came to playoff time, things kind of faltered to the wayside because of the way that the team kind of interacts. And that hasn't really changed as heavily when Joel Embiid has the ball, because when Joel Embiid has the ball, everything pretty much stops. He's not the person that plays within a flow or rhythmic style of play within the offensive scheme. You kind of just say, hey, give him the ball and let him work. And right now that is working. And the assist that he's, dishing out on a night-to-night basis is basically coming from double teams. And dishing out to his teammates has never been Joel Embiid's strong suit. When you look at it historically, he's always had an issue playmaking, and he's not really a playmaker now. But passing out of the double team is something that he struggled in historically in his career. But right now, he's actually doing a pretty good job in dishing out those assists and not getting too many turnovers in the process. But even still, he does have an issue with turnovers because he still is struggling in the regards of, getting his teammates involved. And with the amount of movement that they have in the offense and trying to facilitate more and more players getting the ball, that's just bound to happen. But even with the fact that he still is averaging around like 3.8 turnovers, the team is still ranked third in turnover percentage. They're not turning over the ball. And matter of fact, he's quite literally being the main distributor of those turnovers. But that just is bound to happen when you are having a high usage rate and allowing yourself to be the number one person on the offense. You're going to have the ball for the majority of the game. You're going to make mistakes, and that's fine. And I think the reason for his explosion in this regular season, at least when you look at in terms of points, because he's averaging at least around like 8 more points than he has historically in his career, we really have to thank Nick Nurse. Nick Nurse has been one of the best coaches for Joel Embiid in unlocking the talent that he has, and also unlocking the talent that the team has in terms of role players. Now, if you are a fan of my channel, if you've been around my channel a lot, you know how much emphasis that I put on having really good role players to be on your team, and how having really good role players is going to facilitate more and more wins and successful seasons for you, rather than having, let's say, a super team like they have in Phoenix. And I think this is really expounded upon when you look at the 76ers. Can we really say that Tyrese Maxey is a superstar? No. And that's not to take away from the fact that Tyrese Maxey is having a phenomenal season and having a really, really good season. And matter of fact, this is his best season, and that he has taken the leaps and bounds in terms of improving his game and being a playmaker, and especially in a system where being a playmaker is a pivotal part of this whole offense and how this whole scheme kind of works. But we got to tell the truth, because there's really only one superstar on the team, and that is Joel Embiid. But the team is perfectly constructed that you have a lot of other problems to worry about on the court. You still have Nicholas Batum. You still have Tobias Harris, Robert Covington, Corks Moss, and even Kelly Oubre. Like, everybody on this team is solid. And when you have people built in and bought into your system, it makes playing the game a lot more easier. And so Joel Embiid, who's having the most successful season, especially scoring, that a center has ever had outside of Shaq, when you look at the games, he's having a lot of space. He can play around wherever he wants on the court. A lot of the times in the Nick Nurse system, he's on the three-point line or just above the free throw line. And historically, when he was playing with Doc, it would be more so in the paint. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but the spacing of the court just opens up when you have Joel Embiid, especially with the way that he has made improvements to his game. That's one thing that we really have to respect. The fact that, you know, when you had a teammate like Ben Simmons, who by all his faults wasn't necessarily the most motivated player, but regardless, that did not stop you from improving as a player yourself. And we're seeing the fruits of trust the process. But it always comes down to playoffs for me. Yes, Joel Embiid will win the MVP award, but what happens in the playoffs? In my opinion, even with the Nick Nurse system, I think with the way that playoffs work, in the sense that you are able to scheme better, because right now there's no way you can really scheme for this team. It's really difficult, especially if you're coming from back-to-backs. But it's really easy to scheme with the fact that if we just make Joel Embiid the primary scorer, which he already is, and be the only focal point, and really lock down on the role players, this team is going to be really, really stagnant. And listen, we have seen, just like cases like last year, where Joel Embiid, when it comes to the playoffs, he does not show up. Does not show up for multiple reasons, like I said before in the video, of not having a lot of spacing, not having a lot of teammates who are able to kind of like pick up the slack when he's not playing well. But at the end of the day, the buck stops with the best player. You can't always depend on your teammates of role players to keep you in the game when you're not shooting that well. Last year, we were only graced that the 76ers were even able to stay within the series between the Boston Celtics, only because of James Harden's Herculean efforts in a couple of those games. But when Joel Embiid came back, we saw that, you know, the team just wasn't really running right. It was running a little bit janky. It was a little bit wonky. It wasn't the most smooth iteration of 76ers basketball that we're seeing right now. Now, I know that it was with, you know, Doc Rivers, and of course, we understand Doc Rivers isn't the greatest coach of all time. But Nick Nurse might be able to have those same issues that Doc Rivers had, because what do you do with a player who's not that mobile off ball? It's really difficult, you know, and you can make him as mobile as you want to be, but when he gets the ball, everything stops, like I said. And that's a style of offense that is simply not winning basketball. It's not going to win you a lot of championships. It's not going to win you a lot of games in the playoffs. And so that's what I really think. I think that the 76ers are going to have problems, especially when they go against the Celtics, who the Celtics are just stacked, man. Like, they are amazing. I don't think that Joel Embiid will have a very successful postseason. But regular season, when it's hard for teams to scheme for you, it's hard for teams to kind of figure out what to do against a certain team, especially when they don't have enough time, Joel Embiid is giving an all-star, a superstar, a historical caliber season right now. Because averaging 35 points is no joke. And if we're going to keep it honest, if he is going to be disqualified for missing way too many games, that's the only thing that's going to stop him from getting an MVP. Shai Gilgeous is probably the next in line, like I said earlier in the video. Jokic is 2, but really it's a lock, and it's Joel Embiid's award to lose. So yes, Joel Embiid does deserve the MVP award because with the way that he's playing right now, I mean, there's just nothing that anybody can do to stop him.